Why Dogday would be the most important character in Poppy Playtime Chapter 6 is a question that fans have been circling for a long time, and once you start pulling on the thread the whole sweater starts to unravel. Dogday looks like a mascot, a safety toy, a friendly face built to comfort children inside a factory that stopped caring about children a long time ago, but underneath that soft orange fur is a character who might carry more weight than any other figure in the entire Smiling Critters lineup, and here is why. Start with the obvious. Dogday is the only smiling critter we have actually fought alongside. Instead of running from in Chapter 3, he does not chase us, he does not corner us, he lights the way through the theater, and that single design choice separates him from every other critter in the game. Bobby, Bear Hug, Catnap, Bunzo, Bunny, Picky, Piggy, Hoppy, Hopscotch, these are threats first and characters second, but Dogday gets something none of them get. He gets a redemption arc before the story even finishes, explaining why he needed one that alone should make players suspicious. Games do not usually give a minor enemy a hero moment for no reason. Mob developers plant seeds early and pay them off later, and Dogday getting turned back from a smiling critter monster into something closer to himself in Chapter 3 is not a throwaway moment, it is a setup. Now think about what Dogday actually represents inside the lore of Playtime Co. The smiling critters were built as a safety response after the Bunzo Bunny incident, where a child was injured by an unsupervised toy. Dogday specifically was designed to protect children from harm, using light as both a comfort tool and a literal weapon against the dark. That is not just flavor text, that is thematic architecture. The entire Chapter 6 setting, according to leaks and teasers, is expected to plunge deeper into darkness, both literal and figurative. Underground areas, cut power sequences, and enemies that thrive without light. If that is true, then a character whose entire existence is built around light becomes mechanically and narratively essential, not just a nice character to have around, but a structural piece of how the chapter is supposed to work. There is also the Catnap connection to consider. Catnap is framed as the leader of the smiling critters after they turned hostile, and Catnap represents sleep control and the hour of sleep that keeps the orphans sedated and obedient. Dogday stands as the thematic opposite of that. He is about staying awake, staying alert, staying protective. If Chapter 6 is building toward a final confrontation with Catnap, or with whatever is above Catnap in the hierarchy, then Dogday is not just a supporting character, he is the narrative counterweight. The story needs someone or something to push back against the sleep hour, and Dogday already has the built-in symbolism to do exactly that. Look at his actual abilities too. His flashlight belly is not just a cute detail, it doubles as both a light source for puzzles and a way to repel enemies that fear brightness. That mechanic already got used in Chapter 3 in a limited way, but limited is the key word there. It felt like a demo of a bigger system rather than the full expression of what Dogday can do. A lot of fans believe Chapter 3 was intentionally holding back on Dogday mechanics so the full potential could be unveiled later when the stakes and the darkness are both higher, and Chapter 6 with its promised expansion of the world outside the orphanage is exactly the kind of setting where a fully realized light mechanic would matter most. Then there is the emotional angle, which people sometimes forget to weigh as heavily as the mechanical one. Dogday is voiced and animated with more warmth than almost any other character in the game. His lines carry genuine affection toward the player character. He calls them buddy, he encourages them, he sounds relieved when they survive something dangerous. That emotional throughline matters because Poppy Playtime as a series has always used contrast between horror and comfort to hit harder. Losing a comforting character or having that character sacrifice themselves lands differently than losing a background prop, and if the writers are setting Dogday up as the emotional anchor of the back half of the story, then his importance is not just plot related, it is about giving players someone to actually care about while everything else in the world tries to kill them. There is also unresolved history to think about. We still do not fully know what happened to Dogday before his brief redemption. We do not know how long he was under Catnap control, we do not know whether his current state is stable or temporary, and we do not know how much of his original safety programming survived the hour of sleep. That ambiguity is exactly the kind of gap a game likes to fill in a later chapter, and Chapter 6 being framed as a chapter about going further into the facility and further into its secrets is the perfect place to answer those lingering questions. People also point to datamined audio and early trailer material that reportedly shows Dogday appearing again in expanded capacity, though as always with unreleased content this should be treated as speculation rather than confirmed fact. But even setting aside any leaks, the narrative logic on its own supports the theory. A character introduced as a threat turned briefly into an ally with unresolved backstory, unique light-based mechanics, and a built-in thematic opposition to the main antagonist is not the kind of character a writer abandons after one chapter. Put all of that together and Dogday starts to look less like a side character and more like a load-bearing piece of the story. He is the mechanical answer to a dark setting, he is the emotional core the horror needs to work, he is the thematic opposite of Catnap, and he is a mystery the plot still needs to solve. None of The other smiling critters check all 4 of those boxes at once. Bobby Bearhug is muscle. Catnap is the ideological threat. Bunzo Bunny is a recurring hazard. Picky Piggy and Hoppy Hopscotch are situational dangers, but Dogday is the only one built with light protection, warmth and unresolved history baked directly into his design. So when people ask why Dogday would be the most important character in Chapter 6, the answer is not really about hype or fan favoritism. It comes down to structure. The story has spent 3 chapters quietly building a character shaped exactly like the tool the plot is going to need next: a source of light in a place about to get a lot darker, a source of warmth in a story about to get a lot colder, and a source of answers in a mystery that keeps getting bigger. Whether the theory turns out to be exactly right or only partly right, the pattern is hard to ignore. Dogday has been set up like a Chekhovian flashlight left glowing in the corner of every chapter so far, waiting for the moment the story finally needs him to shine. And if Chapter 6 is even half as dark as everything points to, then that moment might be closer than anyone thinks. There is one more piece of the puzzle worth walking through before wrapping up, and that is the way Playtime Co. as a company inside the story has always treated its safety mascots as failed experiments rather than finished products. Bunzo Bunny was a safety response that spiraled out of control. Catnap was a safety response repurposed into a control mechanism for the orphans, and Dogday sits right in the middle of that pattern as a safety response who briefly broke free of his own programming. That break is rare in this universe. Almost nothing in Poppy Playtime gets to choose its own path once it has been twisted by the factory, yet Dogday managed a moment of clarity long enough to help the player survive the theater sequence. A writer does not build that kind of exception into a character without planning to use it again later. Think also about pacing across the series so far. Each chapter has escalated not just in horror but in scope. Chapter 1 introduces the orphanage and Huggy Wuggy. Chapter 2 expands into the factory production floor and introduces Mommy Longlegs. Chapter 3 pushes into the theater and the smiling critters and hints at Catnap as a bigger threat behind everything. If that escalation pattern holds, then Chapter 6 is not going to shrink the cast down, it is going to widen the stakes and bring back the pieces that were left dangling. Dogday is one of the most obviously dangling pieces in the entire story. A character with a redemption moment and zero resolution is basically an open loop, and open loops in a horror story built on mystery boxes almost always get closed eventually. There is also the branding angle to consider. Mob Entertainment has leaned heavily into Dogday. Merchandise, plush toys, artwork and promotional material feature him prominently, often more prominently than Catnap, despite Catnap technically being positioned as the bigger antagonist of that era of the story. Companies do not always put marketing weight behind characters who are about to disappear from the plot. That kind of visual presence in trailers and store shelves tends to track with a character who still has story left to tell rather than one whose arc quietly ended off screen. Put together, the structural gap, the thematic opposition to Catnap, the unique light-based toolkit, the emotional warmth, the unresolved backstory and the marketing presence, and the picture gets pretty clear. Dogday is not a side character being kept around for nostalgia. He looks like a character being held in reserve for exactly the kind of chapter that Chapter 6 is shaping up to be, one that goes deeper underground, gets darker in tone and demands a counterbalance to Catnap and the hour of sleep. That is the theory laid out end to end, and honestly the more you look at how deliberately Dogday was built, the harder it gets to write him off as just another mascot in a world full of monsters. He might just. But there is one final question we have to ask: if Dogday really is being saved for something bigger, what exactly could his role be in Chapter 6? And this is where the theory gets even more interesting, because Dogday does not necessarily have to become a fighter or a permanent companion to be important. His biggest role could simply be helping the player understand what happened to the smiling critters and what Playtime Co. did to them. Dogday has already experienced the transformation from protector to victim and then briefly back toward himself, which means he could be one of the few characters capable of explaining what the other smiling critters went through. He could remember things that the player has never seen, and those memories could reveal information about Catnap, the hour of joy, the experiments, or even the people responsible for turning these characters into monsters. And that would make Dogday important in a completely different way, not because he is the strongest character, not because he has the biggest attack, but because he could be the key to understanding the past. Imagine entering a completely dark section of the factory with Dogday helping guide the player through it while memories of the smiling critters slowly begin to appear around them. Suddenly the character who was introduced as another victim becomes the guide through the very mystery that created the monsters in the first place. That would bring his entire character arc full circle. He was created to protect children, he was controlled by the factory, he became a victim himself, he broke through that control, and now he could finally choose to protect someone again, the player. And there is another possibility that makes this even more interesting. Dogday might not be completely free. His moment of clarity in Chapter 3 proves that something inside him was still fighting against Catnap. control, but we never got confirmation that the corruption was permanently removed, so Chapter 6 could test whether Dogday can actually resist that influence when the stakes become much higher. If the factory has a way to control the toys, then Dogday could be forced to make the same choice again, obey or resist, and this time the decision could have much bigger consequences. That would also explain why his redemption moment happened so early in the story. Chapter 3 could have shown us that Dogday is capable of resisting. Chapter 6 could show us just how far that resistance can actually go, and if he chooses to protect the player again, then his story would become one of the clearest examples of a toy overcoming the purpose that Playtime Co. forced onto it. That is why I think Dogday's importance should not be measured by how much screen time he gets. One scene could be more important than an entire chapter of appearances if that scene finally answers one of the biggest questions surrounding the smiling critters. Why were they created? Why did they become hostile? And what happened to the parts of them that were still capable of caring? Dogday could be the character who connects all three questions, and if that happens, then the smiling critters stop being just a group of monsters from Chapter 3. They become another piece of the larger experiment, a piece that Dogday might finally help us understand. So is Dogday guaranteed to be the most important character in Chapter 6? No, there is no way to know that until the actual story gives us the answer, but based on everything we have seen so far, the theory has a surprisingly strong foundation. His unique connection to light, his resistance to Catnap, his protective purpose, his emotional connection with the player, his unresolved history, and the fact that his story still feels unfinished, all of those pieces point toward the same possibility. Dogday's story might not have ended in Chapter 3, it might have only started there, and if Chapter 6 brings him back in a major role, then that theater sequence could suddenly look completely different, because what seemed like the end of Dogday's story may have actually been the first time Playtime Co. showed us what he was truly capable of, a character designed to bring comfort inside a terrifying factory, a character who was turned into a weapon, a character who managed to fight against that control, and potentially a character who could become one of the player's most important allies. That is why Dogday could be one of the most important characters in Poppy Playtime Chapter 6, not because the game owes him another appearance, not because fans want him back, but because the story left his character with something that horror games almost never leave unresolved, a choice. And if Chapter 6 finally gives Dogday the chance to make that choice for himself, then the orange mascot we thought was just another victim of Playtime Co. could become something much bigger. He could become the character who finally shows us that the toys are not completely broken, they can still choose, they can still resist, and they can still protect. So when Chapter 6 finally takes us deeper into the darkness, remember Dogday, because if this theory is right, the character we thought was left behind in Chapter 3 might be the exact character the story has been saving for when the darkness becomes impossible to escape. And if that happens, Dogday will not just be returning, he will finally become the character he was always designed to be, a protector. And comment down below with your thoughts, and like and subscribe for more mind-blowing Dogday theories.